why do we have financial institutions? This is going to be one of the easier topics, I reckon, so today's a little bit more relaxed. Why do we have financial institutions? Everything that we did up to now, we basically did without financial institutions, right? We talked about share trading, which means that companies are issuing shares, selling shares to us. We talked about bond finance. Again, you can imagine companies selling corporate bonds also to the general public potentially. So up to now, we didn't have any need for any financial institutions. And today I want to start focusing a little bit on reasons why we actually do have financial institutions. Also links up a little bit to what we see right now in the news. So there's lots of P2B, person-to-person finance, so-called crowdfunding. There's, I think, Kickstarter is one of them. Eats is another one where people just over the internet can buy a very small equity shares or can lend very small amounts of money to other companies or even to other individuals that have a new idea. Some people say that we won't need banks in the future anymore, that banks will become obsolete. And we will talk a little bit about the theory and the actual reasons that we do have banks and other financial institutions today. So basically what we're talking about is, in the past we talked about financial markets, so options, bonds, shares, futures, all of these things you might think of have been traded this way. And today we want to focus more on financial intermediation, so where we have the connection between the individual that is saving and the individual that actually needs finance is not direct, but indirect via the third person. Via bank, for example, right? When you save money in a bank on your deposit account, you never know who's ending up to get that money, which is totally different to if you're buying a government bond, because then you know exactly who's getting the money, the government, if you buy a freshly issued bond. So there's no direct link here. It's indirect via financial intermediaries. And matter of fact is most funds actually nowadays are funneled via the indirect way here. So we might not see it that much in the news, but this is actually much, much more important channel than the direct finance channel. So how come that we use so few of the direct finance option? Well, basically I've wrote here the wishes of all the savers and the wishes of all the borrowers. So savers, of course, want to have high returns. If you save your money, you want to get a high return for it. And the borrower, of course, the opposite. He wants to get the finance as cheap as possible. Now, if we wouldn't have any transaction and information cost, anything that the borrower is paying, we would receive. Right? For example, imagine that somebody's issuing a bond at a yield of 5%. So the cost for the borrower would be 5%. And if you buy that bond, you might think, well, that means you're earning 5%, which is kind of correct. But now let's imagine you're buying a very small amount. You're buying only $100 worth of bond, of a corporate bond, a single corporate bond, very small. Usually we have several costs attached to it too. Number one, you have to pay brokerage, which might cost something. Let's say the brokerage is 1%. So then your return is down already from 5 minus 1% brokerage fees, 4%. So you already have a lower return. Then the next thing is information costs. Before you buy the bond, you want to know how safe is that company. Is the company going to be around in 1, 2, 3, or 4 years? Or might they go into default? So you have to put in a lot of reading time, you have to do your research, and again, that is reducing your fund. So basically, with direct finance, we have all these transaction and information costs in between here. So we can imagine it, we have basically the high return that the saver wants to receive, plus transaction and information cost equals then the cost that the borrower has to pay. Or do it the other way around. Whatever the borrower is paying as a yield, minus transaction and information costs is the net return for the saver. Either way, this thing is driving a wedge between the two, and that's a problem. Next one is savers, of course, want to have safe investments, no default risk. And how can you make an investment extra safe? Let's say for a bond, for example. Well, you can have lots of securities attached to that bond, lots of collateral. You can have the company have lots of equity, or make it a little bit more of a practical example. If you lend something to your neighbor, you might demand that not only your neighbor is promising you get your money back, but maybe his parents and his friends too. So the more people are guaranteeing for that debt, the better it is for you as a saver. But of course, the borrower is not very interested in asking all the neighbors and everybody else. And the borrower, even if you have a company, They're not very interested to put down lots of collateral that they might potentially lose for their debt. So again, they've got the opposite viewpoint here. Problem when we use market finance is, well, in theory, we can buy options, futures, and all these things to get rid of that credit risk, so to buy insurance. But again, imagine if you're just investing $100 or $1,000. Number one, futures are not available for that small amount. Futures are being traded off $100,000 plus. And even for an option, it would be hard. And even if you get an option for such a small amount, the fees that are involved in there, again, are very high. So it would simply not be worth to buy an insurance for $100 debt. It's just not worth it. Next one, ability to withdraw on short notice. So that's called also liquidity in finance. So if you're saving, it's good for you if you can withdraw your money anytime very quickly. So for example, if you have a deposit account, you just go to an ATM. In the bank, if you have a savings account, you usually can transfer your money across to your deposit account very fast as well. So it's maybe, either in my case, takes me seconds, but if you're in another bank, it might take 2 days. But that's different, of course, if you have a corporate bond. Getting money out of the corporate bond, you either have to wait till the very end, or you have to go on the market and sell it. But corporate bond markets are not very liquid, meaning there's not very often a buyer for corporate bonds. Right? If you have a corporate bond of, let's take a smaller company, I don't know, I'll just make one up. Bakery and Co., it would be very hard to find somebody who wants to buy these bonds right at the moment when you want to sell it. So they're not very liquid. And again, we have a problem here between the two. Then savers like short maturities, borrowers like long maturities. So long maturities, I think, make sense simply because the borrower wants to have planning security. And for the saver, short maturity just means not only that you got your money back earlier, but remember, short maturity means that the duration is going to be short as well. And if the duration is short, what kind of risk is limited for you or smaller? Which interest rate is the thing. Interest rate risk is lower. Again, it has something to do with risk, and savers don't like risk. And then we have the last one here, small investments. So usually we like to spread our risk as well. So even if you have a decent amount of money to invest in shares, for example, you don't want to buy only one type of share. You want to be well diversified so that you spread your risk around. And research shows you need around 50 different shares in order to be well diversified. And there you can see it, right? Even if you have $50,000 to save, which is quite a decent amount of money as a private person, I reckon. If you buy 50 different shares, it means only $1,000 in each share. And each share transaction, again, has brokerage attached to it. Right? Then you have 50 times the brokerage cost, and it just adds up to a high amount of cost. Good, so this is the basic problem. How do financial intermediaries help them? So again, here I just copied the problems down in gray, and the financial intermediary is sitting literally between the savers and the borrowers. So with a high return, low cost problem here, basically we had the problem that we had high transaction and information costs. And for financial intermediaries, these costs are lower. Number one, a financial intermediary, for example, a bank, is doing all day long evaluations of how good are these borrowers. So they have one person checking this all day long. So this person is specialized and very productive at that one. That means the cost per checkup is very low. Also, they've got economies of scale. They simply do a lot of this. They've got all the computer IT systems. They have credit scoring systems behind it. So for financial intermediaries, the transaction information costs are much, much, much lower. Then the default risk. Again, there's expertise. Banks are much better at judging how risky a potential borrower is. And we will see later on, basically next week, that more or less with the magic wand, banks can transform risky assets, so the risky bonds, risky debt on this side here, into safe deposits. We don't need to worry about that one today, but banks can do it. But this is the part I want to worry about today a little bit. Adverse selection and moral hazards. So these are two major information problems that are making this market, direct finance between saver and borrowers, tricky. That's what we will spend most of the time on today. Then we've got the liquidity problem here. So savers want to have the funds very liquid. Borrowers need long planning horizons. and banks again can help there. So banks basically can hand out on the one side long-term loans, 5, 10, 30-year loans. But on the other side, they have deposits that are very short-term. So if you go to the bank and you have money in your deposit account, you believe you can withdraw at any time. And in the normal day-to-day banking business, that works out quite well too. Similar with the duration, or with the maturity. Savers like short maturities, borrowers like long maturities, and banks again can transform these maturities. So for example, we can have a 30-year loan, which we are financing by lots of 5-year savings accounts. So 5-year savings accounts, then after 5 years we do another 5-year savings account, and so on. So you just have several 5-year savings accounts in a row, and then we have a 30-year loan on this side. And then we magically transformed lots of short maturities into one long maturity. And small investments, I think this one here is quite clear. So we're just collecting from lots of small savers. Everybody's saving $1,000. And if you've got 50 people together that saved $1,000, we simply can give out a $50,000 loan on this side. So we're basically merging these things. So all these things financial intermediaries can do. Now there's different type of financial intermediaries. We've got banks, which is a major one in this class. Money mutual funds, they do part of these functions as well. Insurance companies do part of these functions. So basically anything that has to do with finances is standing between savers and borrowers, so which is channeling money through it, you can imagine as a financial intermediaries. And all of these help with these type of problems, but what's special about banks is that they do all at once. Now we're going through each of these in more detail. So transaction costs, I said already, brokerage commission. Then on the other side, if you're the company, you also have transaction costs. So if you want to issue bonds, for example, you have to first make a roadshow, you have to print prospectuses, you have to check all the legal requirements. I usually have to go to an investment bank to help you to set up the first bond issue. So there is a lot of fees involved there, a lot of cost. Also, you have to report afterwards your financial account. So you have to open up your accounting. And not every company likes to do that. That's the reason why some companies prefer to finance internally, simply because they don't want to open up the information about their business too much. And these things, of course, get cheaper per unit with economies of scale. So let's say if a company wants to raise $100,000, they would never get the idea to issue bonds. The cost of issuing bonds is just too high for just $100,000, right? If you want to issue $100 million of bonds, that's different. Then it's worth doing it. Similar with shares. So a share issue, a small bakery would never issue shares. They're just too small to it. The costs are too high. If you're a very, very large company, of course, then it's worth it. So that's the reason why it says here economies of scale. Makes things cheaper. So small companies, small investors are simply staying away from direct finance because of the cost involved. Then we have information cost here. So information cost is we have to find out how creditworthy are these companies if we want to invest in them. If you buy shares, how good of a business is that company doing? So you have to read up on it. You have to find out a lot. And let's think, for example, we know already that usually savers are saving a small amount, a few $1,000s, $10,000. But the companies need several $1 million. So if a company, for example, issues bonds to the general public, everybody who's buying these bonds has to read up on that company. Everybody who wants to make sure that they get their money back has to follow the financial reports of this year. So every half year, every year, they have to read the financial reports, see how's my company going? Are the bonds still safe? And if you've got 10,000 investors, each invested a few $1,000s only, that means 10,000 people have to read all these financial accounts. And does that sound like a useful use of your time, reading financial accounts all day long? They're a few hundred pages thick. Let's say we've got a street, 5 people in the street want to invest in this corporate bond. Doesn't it make sense that the 5 neighbors, each of them is reading all the financial accounts? I would say no. Because the information, once one neighbor figured out that this company is good, it's enough that one person knows it. There's no need for 4 other people now to read it. The only need there is because the other 4 people don't know it yet. And that's where financial intermediaries help again, because I've got one specialist, the analyst, who's reading up all these things, trying to suss out how valuable is this company, how creditworthy are they, rate the credit rating of that one, and then everybody can rely on it. There's no need for all the other colleagues in the department to read the financial reports too. So you're economizing on information costs. That's the main message there. And from an economic point of view, of course, it's useless that everybody's reading these financial reports. If very few people read these financial reports and then do the right decisions for us, that will be a much cheaper way of doing it.